I've got a theory about the villain in Spider-Man Brand New Day. Is it a good theory? Who's to say? You in the comments or whatever. But I'm just gonna lay it out. I'm calling it the 7S theory for no other reason than when I started writing it down, I realized almost every important beat started with S. This theory comes from watching the new trailer and keeping up with casting rumors. Which means, to get this thing going, I've got to start the theory with another theory. I'm pretty sure this is Jean Grey. Now, I know what you're thinking. Nando, just because she's a redhead doesn't mean she's playing Jean Grey. Yes, I'm aware. These guys wear wigs all the time anyway. However, I was convinced about Jean by this guy, because we don't know much about Tramell Tillman's character. Rumors pointed to him being one of the higher-ups at Damage Control, the cleanup crew turned super police. They even pointed out a character, but one that felt pretty unrealistic, a man named William Metzger. William Metzger has been in a grand total of 6 comics, and they're not even in continuity. They're a retelling of the X-Men's origin, and William Metzger is sort of like William Stryker, but if he was an influencer. He never made it into the main universe, and just generally doesn't really matter. And while his name is never said in the trailer, one of the international versions gave him the name Bill in the captions. And since that was the rumor, and there aren't any Bills or Williams in Damage Control, kinda gotta assume that's William Metzger. So why would they go with Metzger, when there are so many other Damage Control names they could use? Or Spider-Man characters. There is even a character from the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon who is the head of that universe's Damage Control named Mac Porter, and he sorta looks like Tramell. So why not use one of those names? Unless the X-Men connection is significant. And recently, Marvel Outings have been doing a lot of legwork to establish Damage Control as the premier government superhero hunters. Miss Marvel, who it turns out is a mutant, had a big fight with Damage Control. Wonder Man, who we don't know is, but sort of might assume would be a mutant, had a big fight with Damage Control. Damage Control loves bugging mutants. And so if Sadie Sink is maybe a mutant, why Jean specifically? Simple. Sadie Sink is a big star in the right age range to lead a future X-Men movie. Apparently, she's gonna be in Secret Wars. Why wouldn't she be Jean Grey? Like, sure, she could be Rachel or Hope or even a non-redhead like Rogue or Kitty, but why not Jean? I can't think of a good reason. Also, this trailer really leans on the idea of rebirth, and you know which Marvel character is the most associated with rebirth? The one that keeps dying and coming back to life. So let's say Sadie Sink is Jean Grey, and Tramell Tillman is William Metzger. If there is already one X-Men and one X-Men villain in the movie, why not another? And you may be saying, why another at all? We've got Metzger, Scorpion, Tarantula, Boomerang, all these hand ninjas, and according to rumors, Ramrod and Tombstone. That is more than enough villains. One more is too many. And to that I'd say, I think that's the point. Spider-Man is overwhelmed and losing himself in his work, like Yelena or Reed. It's a very Phase 5 and 6 way to be. But okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, I want to talk about the shot that really caught my attention. The big set piece from this trailer features the Punisher and Spider-Man chasing some sort of runaway mini tank. Then you've got this shot at 1 minute and 46 seconds, which seems to be the aftermath of that chase, with Spider-Man and some Damage Control agents opening up the tank and finding a little old lady. Then this happens. Some sort of consciousness hops from the little old lady to a Damage Control agent to another Damage Control agent. The first possessed agent makes a cheeky little smile, and once the whatever leaves the lady, the next time we check in on her over Spider-Man's shoulder, she seems to be nursing a headache, which could be the result of the possession or the crash or both. Now, without hearing any leaks or anything like that, just watching this trailer, and as a Marvel Comics fan, this is both strange and familiar. Strange because if you assume that Sadie is Jean and no other telepaths are in this movie, that's not usually how Jean's powers work. I'm sure she could do it, she's Jean Grey after all, but 2 problems here. A, I don't see Jean deliberately using her telepathy to put someone in danger. The fact that the tank driver is not a random Damage Control grunt, but a little old lady, doesn't feel right for a good guy. But more importantly, B, that's not how Jean's powers usually work. Jean is fully capable of just controlling a mind and then letting it go, like this train scene in X1. That's how all the telepathic mutants that can control minds work. They basically Chromecast their consciousness. And listen, could this be a reinterpretation of Jean's powers? Sure, but I still don't love the little old lady. And yes, is it possible we see the old lady doing something terrible that makes us okay with Jean putting her in mortal danger, like listening to music on the train without headphones? It's certainly possible. But Occam's razor, if I saw that power being used in a Marvel movie, what would I assume? This power, what we see here, it's not just telepathy. That's telepathic possession, which is a much more specific power that only a few characters have. You've got Karma of the New Mutants, although she's more of a Chromecaster. You've got Hitchhiker, but he's super low profile, also a good guy. Proteus can do this, however he tends to damage the bodies he jumps into, and we don't see any of that here. There's O-Gun, and listen, let's take a little little detour into another video called Maybe Actually It's Ogun. So Ogun is a telepathic mutant samurai who trained Wolverine back in the 30s. He became obsessed with cheating death and eventually managed to transfer his consciousness into a mask. And Ogun, now just the spirit, was able to send his consciousness into people's bodies, a power he used almost exclusively to torment Logan. So I bet you're thinking, wait, has this guy even met Spider-Man? Don't think so. But look who's in this movie for no good reason. The Hand. And there were rumors that Silver Samurai and Viper would be the main antagonists, which, sure, that could be the result of somebody seeing Ogun and accidentally assuming he's Silver Samurai. And yes, I know ninjas and samurai are different, but for these purposes, they might as well be the same. We also saw a Pinterest board that seemed to belong to one of the costumers on Brand New Day that featured ninja and samurai outfits, and specifically red ones. Also, during that first week of filming, people noticed a red dragon symbol on the tank. People assumed this was a reference to the Inner Demons, the henchmen of Mr. Negative. That color and symbol actually works way better with Ogun because of how closely it resembles his mask. But I doubt it's Ogun just because he's so specifically a Wolverine villain. If you wanted to do evil samurai, you would just use Silver Samurai or Gorgon, who's traditionally also a high-ranking member of Hydra, which means he'd hook into the MCU comfortably. So it could be Ogun, but I think that's unlikely. Other characters that can do possession. Cassandra Nova, but we just did her. Nocturne of the Exiles, pretty deep cut. Elias Bogan, even deeper cut. I've seen people suggest Typhoid Mary, who is a psychic and a mutant and a redhead, but we already did Typhoid Mary in the second season of Iron Fist, which, listen, it isn't that bad, and I'm willing to bet counts enough that we don't see her again up till after Secret Wars. I guess Apocalypse in his movie can do it, but he needs the celestial technology and the pyramid, and maybe Professor X, who does it at the end of Last Stand for some reason. But once you get past those guys, there's really only one game in town. Okay, there's two. Another detour. What about Malice? First of all, no, I'm not talking about Sue Storm when she goes bad and puts on that costume that makes the Fantastic Four actors go, oh. I'm also not talking about the bunch of Black Panther characters. Marvel loves using the name Malice. I'm talking about Alice McAllister, a mutant with the ability to possess people. But what separates Malice from guys like Karma and Proteus is that she does not have a body anymore. It died. So Alice is just a consciousness floating from body to body like we see in the trailer. Also, and this isn't important, but I think it's funny, you know who Malice is possessing because a little choker appears on the neck of the host body. Adorable. My main knock against Malice is that she's just not that interesting. Sure, she could conceivably do this, but she just feels sort of small to be playing this significant of a role. But maybe they change the origin, and they probably lose the choker, even though I'm sure Hulk could pull it off. But then, who is this character if you take that away? They're just someone who can body jump without a real goal, or a philosophy, or personality. So when all of those guys are off the board, we are left with one prime suspect, and he is the first S in this theory, the Shadow King. Understanding Shadow King and why he's fun are the most important parts of this theory, and luckily the next Nando v Movies video is about which mutants I think would make a good antagonist in the first MCU X-Men movie. I go over all the major X-villains, which means I cover Shadow King's origin in a minute or so I'm just gonna play that here. Give you a sneak peek of a video that's currently on Nebula, and you can go watch that right now. Here we go. Okay, so this is a weird one. Let's start with Amal Farouk. He was a mutant with telepathic powers who, after his family was killed by a plague, was visited by a thing. The thing was sort of an evil space consciousness made of nightmares calling itself the Shadow King. And because he was lonely, Farouk agreed to be the earthly host of the Shadow King. That meant the psychic monster thing could do evil using Farouk's body, and for most of comics history, the two stayed together. The Shadow King consciousness also has telepathy and might be the strongest telepath in existence. It's able to possess pretty much anyone against their will, and this thing is just plain old evil. Shadow King is known for a few things. In the comics, he was the boss of a group of Egyptian street thieves that included a young Aurora Monroe. Shadow King is also responsible for the Muir Island saga, where he took over a bunch of heroes and forced the X-Men and X-Factor to work together and become a single team. And many people who are not into the comics probably know the Shadow King as the main antagonist of FX's Legion, where he was played mostly by Aubrey Plaza and Naveed Negban, and sometimes he was this weird giant thumb guy. So okay, the Shadow King has shown up in live action, but he's not a household name. It's also on the right scale for a fresh X-Men team. He's got personal connections to Storm. He's a telepath, so that would make him an interesting match for Jean and the Professor. I really only got two negatives with him. First, if you go with the traditional Shadow King route, I can see Farouk being a character with some weird racial connotations. Now, obviously, he's a space entity possessing an Egyptian guy, but still could be trouble. Second, and more importantly, while Shadow King is the right villain class for these guys, a fun Shadow King story tends to involve the Shadow King controlling some heroes and forcing them to fight other heroes. So that feels more like a civil war, which you need to set up. We need to know how these guys feel about each other if the turning on one another is going to be interesting. Now that you understand the basics of the character, I think you can see why I feel like he'd fit into this movie. If Sadie Sink is actually playing Jean Grey, which I am totally on board with, then throwing an X-Men villain into the mix makes sense. In fact, it makes a lot more sense than, making Kang the main villain in an Ant-Man movie, or using Red Hulk and the Leader as the villains in a Captain America movie. At least here, a main character would be connected to the Shadow King. Plus, it's not like there aren't also a ton of Spider-Man villains in this movie, and we already have an X-Men villain represented in the movie via Tremel Tillman's William Metzger. And Shadow King wouldn't just be set against any X-Men, but Jean Grey, who's also a telepath. Those are the kind of mutants that the Shadow King tends to prefer in the comics. So perhaps either Jean is on the run from Shadow King, or Shadow King possessed Jean, but she broke free using her telepathy, and now she's pursuing him. And hey, if Jean was possessed at some point, maybe she did some things that got her on Damage Control's radar, and that's why she's such a high-profile target. I also think this line,
"We are faced with a danger that we can't control, one we can't even see,"
feels particularly Shadow King-y, since let's say he was talking about Jean or another telepath, and presumably one he knew. Wouldn't that line be, we're up against an enemy who can be anywhere, or an enemy who we can't find? An enemy you can't see feels like it's describing either an invisible villain or one who only exists as some sort of astral entity. I also want to focus on one specific part of the Shadow King's origin. In Extreme X-Men Annual number 1, page 28, Shadow King describes himself to Rogue as, quote, "The shadow within humanity's soul. When the first dream came in the night, I was born as the first nightmare." And in this scene in the trailer, we seem to see Spider-Man violently waking up caught in a bunch of webbing. So it looks like a big transformation happened during one of Peter's nightmares. And you may be saying, well, where did Shadow King come from? Like, sure, he's a nightmare monster, but why is he here now? And why New York? Traffic can be a mess, but congestion pricing seems to really be making a difference. Well, something else happened recently in the city that would seem like Shadow King's whole deal, and it is S number 2, the Sentry. In the finale of Thunderbolts, which is confirmed to have taken place before the events of Brand New Day, Bob took on the mantle of the Sentry, but lost control and was overtaken by his darker identity known as the Void. The Void unleashed a wave of shadow over Manhattan and probably most of the tri-state area, considering how quickly it was spreading and how long our characters spent in the Void rooms, and for some non-insignificant period of time, everyone touched by the shadow relived their worst memory over and over again. If there was a single event that could summon the Shadow King, that's it. He feeds on negativity and suffering, so I would not be surprised if the nightmare made manifest comes to New York because it was the epicenter of the Void's trauma torture rooms. But what does Shadow King want? Well, he's usually a pretty simple guy because he's so evil. He likes to take over more and more powerful people and use their influence to spread suffering. And how could he do that here? Well, I've got two characters that amount to S's 3, 4, and 5. Savage Hulk and Savage Spider-Man. If the Void wanted to possess the most dangerous person on Earth, I'm not convinced Hulk is the strongest anymore, but he's up there. I think power scalers could make the case that Wanda, Namor, Carol, Thor, and Sentry are all on that level. But Hulk also happens to be one of the easiest to control if you're able to get past the Banner guardrails and access the pure Hulk, sometimes known as Savage Hulk. So I'm not surprised that the body-swapping villain is in a movie with a Hulk. On the other hand, if the Shadow King wanted to possess someone who is both powerful but also beloved, Spider-Man's an easy choice. Perhaps Shadow King wants to escalate the war between the enhanced people and Damage Control. And maybe part of that plan is taking Spider-Man, the cool young hero people seem to generally like, and corrupting him. Honestly, besides Steve Rogers, I can't think of a better pillar of morality in the Marvel Cinematic Universe than Spider-Man. And if the Shadow King possessed Spider-Man, something he could do to mess with everyone is awaken a part of Peter's personality that he has been up till now trying to cover up. What in the comics is known as the Other, this spirit spider that exists alongside Peter. And if that got in control, Peter could go Savage Spider-Man and freak everyone out. By the way, some people call this character Man Spider, but that's an invention specifically made for the cartoon. There are other times where Spider-Man has kind of transformed more or less into a spider, but the most definitive version seems to be the Savage Spider-Man comic. So do I think the villain is just going to be Shadow King? Not necessarily. I think Marvel is going to do that thing where they merge a couple of characters. What makes me think that? A handful of rumors, but more than that, I'm following a pattern. Marvel does this a lot, and I should know. My first big hit video from just, 9 years ago was about how Hela, the villain in Thor Ragnarok, wasn't really Hela. Like, sure, she was the goddess of death with a big chandelier hat, but many aspects of her character were borrowed from other Marvel characters. She was Thor's secret sister, like Angela. She had the Necro Sword, like Gore. She broke Thor's hammer, like a bunch of other guys, but not Hela. And the nice thing about this approach is that it can lead lead to some real winners. Hela, Ego, Zemo, Wenwu, Agatha, Vulture, Killmonger. All of these villains were both incredibly successful and wildly different from their comic counterparts. But okay then, what other character are we getting here? Well, that would be the sixth S, Shathra. You've almost certainly only heard of Shathra in the context of leaks and speculation about this movie. She was in a handful of Spider-Man comics in the 2000s, but hasn't made much of an impact since. And yet, the name has been thrown around as a potential villain in Brand New Day. And like, if a scooper says Mr. Negative is the secret villain, I could buy it, but I could also see a world where the scooper just made that up because they knew it would get attention and social media sites like Twitter reward engagement, regardless of whether it's a total lie. But Shathra? How many people even know Shathra exists? What's the value in a scooper lying about whether she's in the movie or not? And then people have suggested Disney and Sony might be sowing fake leaks into the ether to flood the zone, but again, then why Shathra? It's not a name people know, it wouldn't make a huge dent, which leads me to believe Shathra is not a red herring. Now, I've done a Shathra video, but that ended up on my second channel, the Nando Cut, which means it's probably like 15 minutes long, so I'm gonna sum up Shathra's whole deal. She is a wasp goddess from Earth 001. Why wasp? We'll get to it. Shathra was tasked by the other gods with arranging the multiverse. She chose to organize reality like a nest, but the gods didn't like that because it was too rigid and seemed to exist to serve Shathra. So they asked Shathra's younger sister to try, and she came up with the Web of Life and Destiny, which gave people on the web more freedom, and it just looked nicer, so the gods chose the sister's design. This infuriated Shathra, who changed into a big evil wasp and vowed to take over the web. She feeds on spider totems, which basically means someone with spider powers who represents the concept of spider for that universe. Peter Parker is one, so is Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2099, basically all the main characters from across the Spider-Verse. So Shathra saw Peter on the web and followed him to Earth 616 so she could eat him, but Shathra also likes to mess with her prey, so she went on TV and pretended to be a woman who was having an affair with Spider-Man. Spider-Man fought and eventually beat Shathra with the help of Ezekiel, and can I just say, it is very nice of Shathra to immediately transform back into Shathra after Spider-Man called her out on TV, since if she didn't transform and just disappeared, it would seem like she told the truth about Spider-Man having an affair, and Spider-Man went to the news studio and knocked her out on live TV. An all-time bad look. And Shathra can take a spider punch because she's a god. She has super strength, speed, durability, can traverse the multiverse, can fly, and has the ability to corrupt spider totems and force them to join her army. Besides that, there's not really a ton to Shathra. Why is she a wasp god and not just a god? Well, she's supposed to be the natural predator of spider totems, so they picked an animal that is uniquely associated with killing spiders, the spider wasp. Fun fact, the spider wasp not only kills spiders, but paralyzes them and lays its eggs in their bodies. So that's a wasp connection. Why do I like her as the villain here? Well, one, she's a Spider-Man villain, and two, she's a multiverse villain, specifically one that catches a whiff of Peter Parker and hunts him down. So sure, the Shadow King would be attracted to this universe by the Sentry incident, but it would be really easy to say that during the events of No Way Home, Shathra was one of the villains that almost came to Earth 616, but since she has multiversal awareness, she didn't forget about Spider-Man and instead decided to track her down, or an incursion could force her into our universe. We have options. The multiverse thing is really happening right now in the MCU, and even though some audiences are tired of it, I think if used just as a method for introducing a villain, it won't be a huge deal. But okay, big question. Can Shathra do this? Not traditionally, and that's where the 7S theory comes in play, because I'm imagining this won't be Shathra like we usually know her. The totem stuff is stupid, and I doubt we're gonna do Web of Life and Destiny stuff in this movie, because it was perfected already in Madam Web. But what if Shathra and the Shadow King were smushed together? Let's call this character Shathra the Shadow Queen. Shadow King's origin, his powers, Shathra's name, her look. We have a nightmare spirit who noticed Earth 616 during the Sentry event and decided to stop by. But because the Shadow Queen does not have a physical body, she needs to possess heroes and villains, hence the body swapping. But Jean was able to track her down using telepathy, and she's here to capture or kill the Shadow Queen. I mean, hell, the entity known as the Shadow King does not even have a formal name or origin. Nobody knows exactly where he's from. So let's take the shell of a Spider-Man character who no one would be mad we hollowed out, Shathra, and fill it with the Shadow King stuff so it makes sense in the movie. But wait, wasn't there another rumored villain for a second? One it seems like we've all forgotten about, and that is our 7th S, Spider Queen. So there were rumors that a character named the Spider Queen was going to show up in Brand New Day, played either by Anne Hathaway or Nicole Kidman, or, and I can't believe we have another double S, Sarah Snook. I think out of all the rumors I've heard, this one got the least attention, and I'm only bringing it up now because it seemed like Brand New Day was casting women in their 40s or something, and we never found out who they ended up getting. Some people theorized that this was originally the Jean Grey role, but somewhere down the line, they rewrote the character as a young adult and Sadie Sink was cast, but I don't buy it. This feels like too big of a change. Also, the timeline doesn't add up. Sink was cast in March of 2025, while the rumors about Snook were coming out in May of that year. But anyway, the Spider Queen thing doesn't really matter, but the idea that a woman in her 40s is going to be playing the villain gels with this Shadow Queen idea. And that's why they've been able to keep this person a secret. We haven't seen them on set because there's some sort of spirit that we only see in human form on the astral plane. Couple of other S's that don't really fit into the bigger narrative, but I think are interesting. First, you've got Spider God. Because Spider-Man doesn't really interact with Shadow King, but that doesn't mean Shadow King has never done any spider stuff. In the comics, in an attempt to trap Storm, Shadow King pretended to be the African trickster god Anansi. It's why there are so many pictures of him online with spider legs. It's that book. And outside of Spider-Man characters, this might be the most spider thing anyone's ever done in Marvel Comics. Then there's the idea of another S, a symbiote. Perhaps they're messing with the symbiote origin. Instead of being created by Null, what if they're a Shathra thing? After all, I doubt we do anything else with Null in a while, considering how well Venom 3 went. And the Shadow King is not unlike a symbiote. He bonds with a host, and if the host is willing, he grants them great power, and if they're unwilling, he uses them as a puppet. Hell, Astral Shadow King, Shathra, and the symbiote even kind of all look the same. So what if when Shathra's destroyed, she leaves behind a symbiote? Perhaps one that another S, Scorpion, bonds with. But to close this one out, I want to show you a version of a scene somewhere around halfway through the movie where Spider-Man gets this information, so you can see how this all comes together. Peter sits down with Jean to talk after his first interaction with Shathra. What the hell was that? She's called Shathra the Shadow Queen. Legends say she's an artifact of the first nightmare, a psionic parasite that's attracted to suffering. Why is she here and not somewhere really messed up like Staten Island or Hoboken? Oh wait, is this because of the Knicks? I think it has something to do with that time the Sentry lost control of his dark side and trapped everyone in the tri-state area in trauma prisons. Also, the Knicks are fourth in the division. For now. So, you know Shathra. She's part of your club? No, she's from another dimension or something. What does she want? Seems like she wants to jump into more and more powerful people until she can control someone as strong as Sentry. Then she can spread her evil all over the world. Like James Dolan. Who? He owns the Knicks, I'll stop. Thank you. Anyway, Shathra tried to jump into one of the people on my team, but he was too powerful. For a second, their minds merged, and that's how we found all this out. Why can't they help you catch her? They don't blend in as well as I do, okay? So where's she going next? Not sure. Probably using damage control to target her next host. She'll be looking for someone powerful whose mind is fractured. They're the most vulnerable. Gargan. Who? I'll explain on the way. Tell Frank to gas up his murder-mobile and follow me. So that's the theory. We're getting a villain named Shathra with the powers of the Shadow King. Why? I have no idea, but it could be fun. I like the Shadow King. He's not my favorite X-Men villain, nor is he the one I expected to see first, but here we are. I do have that video called Who Will Be the First MCU X-Men Villain, where I talk about which villains I think are positioned well for their debuts in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's going to go on YouTube eventually, but if you want to watch it early and ad-free, check out this video sponsor, Nebula. Nebula is, say it with me, a subscription streaming service that I and a bunch of other really cool people helped create. Nebula has evolved so much over the last 7 years. Sure, you can still watch all my videos early and ad-free, and you can watch videos by a bunch of other creators you probably already love. But one of the most exciting things about Nebula is our original programming. Tom Scott has a new series called England, where he goes to every English county to find something interesting. Speaking of symbiotes, if you ever wanted to kill a bunch of symbiotes, or at least disarm them so you could rip them off your body, you should check out this first episode where Tom Scott goes to Leicestershire and he visits a bell-making factory. You see the entire process, learn how bells are made, and it is not how you would expect, especially since this bell-making factory is hundreds of years old, and they're still working with some of the same techniques from a century ago. Tom Scott even gets to use a sledgehammer to break one of the bells a little, because shockingly, it's hard to do. It's hard to use a sledgehammer to break an enormous bell. And each episode of England is going to be on Nebula for a week before it goes anywhere else. On top of that, we got a series that I love watching called Abolish Everything, where someone, maybe a comedian, maybe another YouTuber, makes an argument for something that should be abolished. They state their case, they make a very funny PowerPoint, the political establishment gets to weigh in, and then the audience decides what deserves to actually be abolished. This week they did the championship for the second season. They had a ton of really funny people on it. I've never been on that show, maybe sometime in the future. I think I'd be a fun abolitionist. And then later this year, although hopefully not too much later, Nebula's first original dramatic scripted series, Subliminal, comes out with the episode that I wrote, which I cannot wait for you guys to watch. Nebula is the best way to support all of the creators you already love and all the creators you don't know you're gonna love, but then you're gonna love them when you see them on Nebula. You can also download the videos to your phone, which saves you data when you're not at home. And there are not AI videos on Nebula. So this isn't going to be like YouTube where you go on and you watch a video in a minute or two and you're like, something's off here. And then you realize like, oh, this video is AI, which happens on YouTube and other platforms way more than I would like to admit. Nebula, we all got real stuff made by real creators, and that's why it's great. And a year of Nebula is already a steal at $60 a year, $5 a month. But if you go to go.nebula.tv/NandoViewMovies, you can get a year of Nebula for just $30. That is $2.50 a month. It is an amazing deal. Again, go to go.nebula.tv/NandoViewMovies to check it out. Besides that, thank you to everybody who continues to support the channel on Patreon, everybody that watches these videos early and ad-free on Nebula, everybody that listens to my podcast, mostly Nitpicking, everybody that follows me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. I'm NandoViewMovies on all of those platforms except TikTok, where I'm at Nando Kelly because A, it's complicated. Anyway, that's all I got. I'll see you next time. Bye.